Nice crowd. Great. Wow, welcome. This looks like a great crowd. So many people. So glad you all could join us tonight. So good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us at this Talkback for Seeing Rape 2021. I'm Shauna Trinch, and I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology at John Jay College. My colleague and friend, Professor Barbara Cassidy, and I co-founded Seeing Rape in 2012. This is our 8th production of all new material. So Barbara, can you wave and say hello to everyone and
hi everybody.
Maybe say some rules of engagement.
So I wanted to ask everybody if you could mute yourself, number one, until you ask a question, and then unmute yourself. If you could put your cameras on, if you want to, it would be great to see everybody's faces. And now I forgot the third thing. What was the third thing?
We'll be recording.
We are recording this. So if anybody has any objections to being recorded, hit me up in the chat, or else just be aware of this, that this is being recorded so that we have this as a document of our work.
Okay, thank you. So our goal with this program is to eradicate rape. That's to create a campus, especially where people do not suffer from sexualized or gendered violence. We instead seek to create a world where there's sexual and gender justice. So seeing rape is hard, and we thank you all for challenging yourselves and challenging our society to face it, to bring it out into the open, and to shoulder the shame and the stigma, not of those who are victimized, but of this culture that allows for this to happen. You're courageous to confront sexualized and gendered violence, and we thank you for sharing in this commitment with us as we try to work to eradicate rape. The plays that we'll talk about tonight are on our website, seeingrape.com. They were written by John Jay College students, and they're performed by professional New York City actors who collaborate with us on this project. Please take a moment and read the program on our website, seeingrape.com, to see who these fabulous actors and talented playwrights are. I'm going to introduce you to our panel tonight of 3 special guests who are going to respond to the plays. From there, we'll hear from Seeing Rape's director, Dominique Ryder, and also the filmmaker, Milan Eldridge. Afterwards, I'm going to ask the actors and the playwrights to all introduce themselves by name, and then we're going to open everything up to discussion and where the audience can ask questions and make comments. Okay, so first I want to welcome our 3 special panelists, and I'll begin with Professor Kim Mckinson. Professor Mckinson is a cultural anthropologist who conducts ethnographic research in Kingston, Jamaica. She's currently an assistant professor of anthropology at John Jay College. Kimberly serves as the chair of the department's Racial Justice Initiative Working Group and is a member of John Jay's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Her current book project is based on her ethnographic research on security and insecurity, post-coloniality, and the spatialization of Black historiography in Kingston. Her work has been supported by John Jay College, the National Science Foundation, the University of California Center for New Racial Studies, and the University of California Collaboratory for Ethnographic Design. Welcome, Professor Mckinson. I'm going to ask you to respond in a second as soon as I introduce Professor Jenny Andrus. Jennifer Andrus is an associate professor at the University of Utah. She teaches courses on rhetorical theory, discourse analysis, legal rhetoric, and gender and rhetoric. Her research for the last decade has been on domestic violence in the Anglo-American law of evidence. She has written numerous articles and 2 books on intimate partner violence. In her most recent book, Narratives of Domestic Violence, she analyzes the stories of survivors, including her own, in an effort to understand the ways such accounts are told. Her important work seeks to reduce the shame associated with being a victim of domestic violence. Dr. Andrus serves on a Utah court committee and is the founding board member of the charitable foundation Fight Against Domestic Violence. Professor Andrus says domestic violence is a public matter that needs space in current discussions of the social issues facing our communities. In addition to being a scholar and an advocate, Dr. Andrus is the mother of 3 wonderful daughters. Our third guest tonight is Bianca Suazo, a former student at John Jay College and a former playwright of Seeing Rape. In 2017, she wrote a great play that was called La Familia de Papa, and it was one of our first Spanish-English code switching plays. And Bianca introduced us to this idea that we could actually do this. So now Bianca is just finishing her master's in international crime and justice, so we welcome her. After these guys talk, then we're going to hear from Dominique and Milan. But I would like to start with Professor Andrus. Is that who I said we would start with? Or Professor, yeah, we'll start with Professor Andrus in asking her to respond to the plays.
I want to first talk about some key terms that emerged for me as I watched. Telling, victimhood, talking about it. Telling, who will believe? I said no, survivor, victim, telling. I'm triggered, and I have never told. I've sometimes told, I finally told, but never all of it. I've given a blowjob to my ex-husband with a gun pressed against my head. If you bite, I'll kill you, he said. I couldn't say no, but I was thinking it. I'm triggered. I want to briefly talk about being triggered, the pleasure of being triggered. Being triggered is an invitation to remember my story. It is my story. Being triggered is an invitation to process. It is an invitation to talk, to tell, to be a victim, and also a survivor. I am both. I like being both. It means I'm alive. Being triggered allows me to take back what was taken from me. Like they said in How Everybody Sees Me Now, I didn't choose any of these terms. I didn't choose to be a victim, but I am. I didn't choose to be a survivor, but I am. I'm triggered. It feels good. It feels good to get this off my chest, to process again, to think through this with you and to tell you. I don't tell this story to anybody. Nobody knows it except for the police, but now you know it and we are connected through triggering. Through these plays, we are bonded through triggering, through telling, through talking. While the warnings are productive, so is this moment of being forced back into my body of abuse, my rape, my story. These plays put me into a volatile, fragile, productive space. They make me think, remember. Too often we put aside and bottle up that time we were raped, that time we were sexually harassed, that time we were made to feel small for being vulnerable, a woman, a man, a person, a body. These plays demand that we engage with this space of feeling, this space of embodiment. They trigger a telling, and I like it. Thank you. And thank you to all of the talented scholar playwrights for these courageous, brilliant, whip-smart plays. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Andrus. We look forward to hearing more from you tonight. That was really powerful, and thank you for sharing that with us. Professor Mckinson.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, Shauna and Barbara, for inviting me to be here today. So first, I just want to begin by offering really sincere gratitude to the playwrights, to the actors, director, producers, and everyone who was involved technically and artistically in some way to bring these powerful stories into the world. And as Professor Andrus said, you know, they really are brilliant and powerful and courageous story. You know, as I was watching the plays, I was thinking about Nina Simone, who commented that it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. And I think that the stories that form a part of Seeing Rape really poetically and poignantly reflect our times and force us to reflect on what I think is really our own individual positionalities during a time when rape and gender-based violence is a daily reality for women across the face of this earth. So in watching the plays, I really found myself reflecting on the global implications of this reality, right? And the global implications of seeing rape. And, you know, for the past few months, I've been in Jamaica with my family, which is where I'm from. And of course, here, like everywhere else in the world, COVID-19 has dominated the news. But Jamaica has been seeing another pandemic of sorts, which is violence against women. 1 in 4 Jamaican women has been a victim of gender-based violence. And for the past few months, I've been reeling every time I pick up the newspapers. There was 20-year-old Kanice Jackson who was raped and strangled. There was Natalie Dawkins, a young teacher who was abducted and killed, her body callously dumped in a shallow grave. But Jamaica is not unique. If we've been paying attention to the news over the past year, we know that in many countries, violence against women has only increased during COVID-19. Calls to helplines have increased 5-fold in some countries. Some of us may have heard of Sarah Everard's murder in the UK. There was Atlanta shootings targeting Asian women. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, which is currently experiencing conflict, men have been forced to rape family members. So as I've meditated on the diverse stories performed in Seeing Rape, right, and being exposed to these very powerful stories of Muslim women, African-American women, Latinx women, these stories written by a diverse set of storytellers who go to a college with such a diverse student body. As I've consumed these stories from Jamaica, but with an eye to the rest of the world, I'm reminded that rape and violence against women is not just a social and racial justice issue, but it's a transnational issue as well. And so I find myself asking, how can a transnational framework allow for a more capacious understanding of how we study gender violence, how we tell the stories of women and men impacted by gender violence? And moreover, how do we go from a theory of transnationalism in thinking about the abolition of gender violence to thinking about what this means in practice, what it means for how we advocate for women across national borders, what it means for how we stand in solidarity? How do we go from theory to structural dismantling? How do we gather and mobilize at the local while also recognizing how global this phenomenon is? And I'll just end by saying, how does all of this thinking really allow for a kind of repair? What does transnational repair look like in this current historical moment that we find ourselves in? So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mckinson. That was very powerful, and it's great to think beyond our own borders and beyond our own positions, right? To come up with something that has a transnational possibility. So thank you. Bianca.
Yes, hi. I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the course. I know it changes the way we see and think about rape. I think I still carry most of what I learned with me today, which is also part of the reason why I decided to major in ICJ for my graduate degree. Watching the plays, it brought me back into the mindset I had while writing the play. I have to be creative, but I also need relevant information. I have to use language that I know in order to basically interpret and to let the world know of how I've seen sexual assault, what I think sexual assault is. I think what I really liked about the plays was the relevant language. I can see my friends using that language. I use that language. I like the nuances that were used. Sometimes rape or sexual assault is not, white and black. There's a lot of gray area and a lot of talking like, is this rape? Is this not rape? And I like the complexity and the issues about identity. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Bianca. It's so great to have you back with us. We miss you. So thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you for bringing this really important student perspective to the work. So Dominique, I would like to welcome you and thank you for being our director this year. It was so fabulous to see you bring your creative and artistic vision to the work. So I'd like you to weigh in here and let us know what you think.
Yeah, for me, the place I start to think from is actually from within the story itself, right? Because I think when we think about storytelling We often don't think about the ways that violences get replicated and repeated, the way that we repeat those grammars and inflict them onto audience members. And I think more importantly, to me, at least as a director, the way that we replicate and repeat those violences onto the bodies of actors. Sadia Hartman talks about, can one witness a lynching without replicating the violences of lynching when talking about it? And that for me is an important question, I think, as someone whose entire job is to create images and to move people in space, right? How do we deal with sexual violence? How do we deal with the gratuitousness of sexual violence while also making sure that the people inside of these stories, the people whose bodies are being put on the line to tell these stories, are being kept safe? And that was, I think, the first point of intrigue for me of really figuring out what that means, how to keep the actors I'm working with safe and to make sure that they know that they are held, in particular because most of the actors in this were Black women, right? And that feels of extreme importance in this moment and in every moment dating back to like the 1600 with the start of the transatlantic slave trade, right? The way that we keep Black women safe when we tell these stories and we talk about the replications of these violences feels really important. And then also what it means to have stories about sexual violence and rape be told by students of color primarily. I think that is the other sort of, for me, missing aspect when we talk about this. We don't often talk about especially not, I think, in a national context, because of the way we view Black women, the way we view Latinx women. They are not usually vulnerable, right? They are not usually people that we think of them as, to quote Zakiya Iman Jackson, suprahuman, right? That they can take these violences and continue to function. What happens when we slow down? What happens when we begin to really ask how these bodies carry this weight, not just of their sexual violence, but of sexual violence that predates them and quite literally predates the modern world we live in. So those are some of the things I was thinking about when it came to directing and really engaging with a lot of the pieces for Seeing Rape.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's so insightful and so powerful. And I think, you know, when we try to do this kind of work, there are all these nuances and complexities that come to bear on the work. And, you know, in many ways, I mean, I think that we all feel that we're transgressing. We're saying things that we're not supposed to be saying. We're talking about things that we're not supposed to be talking about. And it isn't always clear how to make that happen. So you really put it very eloquently in a history that's really important. Milan, I would love to hear from you. You're our filmmaker.
Yeah, so as the editor of the piece, I saw my role as, number one, honoring all of the work that everyone did. It was really powerful, but also trying to bring in some of the elements that we may have seen on stage that we weren't able to capture as clearly in the virtual space. So I felt kind of like a designer at a lot of times when I was editing. So like a lighting designer, drawing attention to certain characters or certain moments where we want to be just with one character, or maybe we want to see everyone in the scene and see how everyone's reacting to each other. At times I felt like I was the set designer, kind of placing people in space and situating them in the location that they may have been. For example, the Zoom call or the FaceTime calls that we saw. At times it felt like sound designer and prop designer kind of supplementing those calls as well. So I think that was the main thing I was concentrating on as I was trying to bring the pieces together, corralling those different elements to better tell and enhance the stories that the playwrights had written.
Yeah, brilliant. It's so interesting to think about different media and how you can do things with different media. So thank you so much for that. I really loved the work that you did in bringing it all together. So I count 5 playwrights. Is there or 4 playwrights from this year on the call? So if you guys could please introduce yourselves, and then I see just one of the actors. I'm not sure if there is anyone that I'm missing. Maybe I need to keep scrolling through the pages, but if the playwrights could first introduce themselves and give us your name and your major and the play that you wrote, that would be great. And anything else that you feel like you want to add right now. So go ahead. Stephanie, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Why not? My name is Stephanie. My major is criminal justice. I wrote the play Operation 007, and I don't know if that was explained to you. That 007 is from the show Grey's Anatomy, meaning License to Kill, which I thought kind of correlate with like the military and stuff like that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll answer some questions as we go along.
Sorry. Yvette?
Hello, everybody. My name is Yvette, and I am an English major currently. I am the writer of Blood is Thicker Than Water, and I am thankful that everybody showed up today.
Okay. Frankie?
Hi, I'm Frankie Belisario. I am currently in my first year of the master's program in forensic psychology at John Jay. I wrote the play Saturday in the Park with my roommate who also took the class. She's unfortunately at work, so she couldn't be here today. But I really appreciate everyone being here. One of the things that we wanted to highlight about our play is that even the more seemingly less serious versions of violence, sexual violence, are still serious. So yeah, that's pretty much what I want to say.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us your co-author's name?
Oh, Jamie Rosenbauer.
Right, Jamie Rosenbauer. Great. Thank you so much. Jadalyn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jadalyn, and I'm a forensic psychology major at John Jay, and I wrote the play. It was a monologue, How Everyone Sees Me Now.
Thank you so much. And Amara, I think you're the only actor that I see on the call. I could be wrong. If there's someone else, please let me know. But Amara, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hey everybody, my name is Amara Brady. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I got to be one of the lucky actors to perform some of these pieces this year.
Thank you so much. Great. Are there any other actors or any other technical people on the call that I'm missing? Is Susanna here? I'm not really sure. If there's anyone else who wants to introduce themselves, we'd love to hear from you guys. And if not, we'd love to open up the discussion we have several courses here tonight and some faculty and some staff. So we want to hear from you guys. You got to see the play, all the pieces. So we're ready to take some questions.
Just an order of business, if you have a question, if you could raise your hand or put the question in the chat. You could send the question directly to me, or you could send it to everybody, however you want, or raise your hand.
And our guests and panelists can feel free to ask each other questions too. Avi, thank you so much. It's great to have you here.
I was really stressed out when I was watching Seeing Rape. And to me, what that says is that it's really important to see it. Because I think when you watch something that causes such a visceral reaction in yourself, you're like, okay, more people need to know. And as someone who's a survivor myself, it was really hard to see stories that told elements of my story in bits and pieces throughout. And it reminds me, of course, for myself, selfishly, that I'm not alone and I can take comfort in that. But also that I have to remember that healing is my journey, but it's also a journey that has to go beyond just healing myself, because it's such a universal problem. It's such an epidemic, right? It just feels constant a lot of the time, right? On a personal level, when I'm healing, it feels constant for me. I remember it all the time. I have dreams about it all the time. I see it everywhere and in everyone and in everything. But even when I'm further forward in my own healing, it is everywhere and all the time on this global level. And that is so terrifying to think about. But it also gives me some small hope knowing that movements like this are happening, that people are trying. I don't necessarily want to use the word force, but are begging people, please see this, please witness me, please witness us. And I think that's such an important plea to just humanity. Please witness this, please help us do something about it. So that was my experience, but I do have a question, because Dominique was saying something about basically ethical acting, right? Making sure that your actors are being held and safe while reenacting things that are difficult or traumatic, right? And I've been looking into that with film stuff. Sometimes they have ethical directors to make sure that there's like consent between the actors if they're acting out, scenes and stuff like that. When you're kind of, I guess, in charge, right, of seeing how someone else's story will play out, using bodies to fill the space and tell the story, how do you keep an environment of accountability, but also just safeness so people can tell you what's going on? Because it is hard to break the silence, I think, when people are uncomfortable sometimes. So I was wondering kind of what you do or what other people felt just about like maintaining a culture and an environment of safety so that they can speak up.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I feel like it is important that Amara maybe talk through this question with me, because she's a frequent collaborator of mine and we work together. I try to put Amara in almost everything I do if I can. And so for me, I think it comes from like the beginning place, right, is like an understanding, well, first, what is a director actually, right? What is the job of the director? And I think oftentimes for people, the job of the director is to be a leader, and the job of the director is like really to move bodies in space. And I don't know how interested I am in those parts of the job. Like obviously blocking is important, duh, right? But what I'm interested in is like rehearsal rooms as spaces for most of the things I work on are primarily about Black people. And so, right, it's a question of like, how do I help Black actors and hold Black actors reignite a political imagination or just a creative imagination that I think gets choked out at every turn, right? We had 8 years of a Black president who spent most of his free time choking out the Black political imagination. How do you reignite that in a rehearsal room? And so for me, it really is about, on the one, understanding that we are equals. I think that's an important first step, is that you and I, as a director and actor, our relationship is not, in my view, one where I am above you. My purpose is actually to help you, right? My purpose in being in this room is to help you to the best of my abilities get where you need to be so that I can help you tell this story. I think sometimes we focus a little bit too much on audiences when it comes to performance. And I'm personally more interested in like process, right? Process is actually where I think process is where the revolution can be more than the product. And so for me, it's like we are one, equals, but two, I am not interested in using notes to harm you. I want notes to be used as a way to help you continue this journey. I don't think it's really weird. I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about actors and performance. I don't think we think about actors as artists the way we need to, and actors as people who grow as artists, right? Like there's nothing more satisfying to me than watching an actor come into a rehearsal room with no clue how to approach something. And then by the end, there's a clear journey they have taken to understanding what it takes to do the thing, right? And so I think that the first step really is just a complete recalibration of what directing can be, what directing is, what directing looks like. And then simultaneously understanding that like, I too have limits, right? The good thing is that we are now in a space where like intimacy directors exist, where like you're talking about, ethical directors exist. I just try to treat people like people and not tools to tell a narrative, right? I think that is also in the way we think about actors as autonomous beings. Amara, does that feel right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've known each other for what, 3 going on 4 years now, something like that.
Mhm.
And I've had the privilege of working with Dominique as both an actor and also a playwright. And I think the thing, like, we were friends before we ever worked together, and that was really important to me. And the thing that astonished me was that, like, Dominique lives by their politic in the room as well as outside in a way that a lot of other directors don't. And I look at directors as like the people who steer the ship. Like, you're in charge of the ship, and can you guide the ship? Do I want to follow you? Do I want you to be my captain in this space? Do I trust you? And if I can't trust you, well, then we have a fundamental flaw, and the likelihood of me being on the ship with you. I think a lot about Moby Dick and like Captain Ahab and all of those people following this man who really did not have the ability to lead these people because he was so blinded by his own revenge. And I think that there are a lot of people in like our different fields who are blinded by their own purpose. And that distracts them from what they actually need to do. Like, for example, I was cast in a show. It had something like 40 people in it, and it was based off of the life of Audre Lorde, who is like, if you know Audre Lorde, or if you don't, you should, but she's like this beautiful womanist who was imagining new worlds and explaining the world to themselves through her own experiences. And they had all these people, and they were not paying anybody equitably. They had 30 people. I was like, this is the weirdest thing, because you're doing a show about somebody who talked so much about equity and about like the way we treat each other, and you did this for the purpose of like spectacle, because you thought the spectacle of your show or that your story was more important than the people who were in the room with you. And that's unfortunate. And I think that I'm always blessed to be in a room with Dominique, because they never do that. They're always like, are you comfortable? Does this make you uncomfortable? Is this okay? And constantly checking in and asking for, you know, consent and clarity. And those are things that are not, unfortunately, they're not usual. So I think that it's definitely, it kind of for me starts and ends with, are you practicing, like practice and practice, and are you practicing what you say that you believe in and what you say you want to do? Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. Does anyone want to kind of respond to those very interesting discussions of approaching art and people before art? Really interesting. And Avi, thank you for the question. I can always count on you to come up with some great questions.
I was happy to get a great answer. I was like, really
was in a class with me. Very thoughtful.
So maybe we could ask.
What about some of the playwrights? I mean, what is it?
I thought maybe we could ask the playwrights to weigh in on that, or on the process of writing these plays. How was it for you to engage with this subject matter as a playwright? Any of you could take that.
I know that with our process, I actually really enjoyed like sitting in on the rehearsals for the play, just to see the process. And I also enjoyed watching Dominique's process and how they were able to give constructive feedback while still facilitating that safe environment. And even like on the day of recording, one of the actresses was frazzled and was going through a lot, working from home from Zoom. You never know what you're going to expect. And they handled it with such grace and with such caring that it was okay, that and that's just like the side of like someone that actually cares. So I appreciated that someone like Dominique was there to actually execute this project and be the captain of this project. And then in the process of writing this, I mean, that was all we could hope for. I mean, unfortunately, this is an epidemic that is ever present and has been present since the dawn of time, seems. So I'm appreciative of everyone in this room for taking the time to actually pay attention to it, when a lot of people just decide that this is something that just is, and this is the way it's going to be, and you gotta just handle it. And no, like we need to change this. From every single person I've talked to, it's either happened to them or it's happened to someone that they know. And that's ridiculous. So I'm really glad that everyone is in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. How about the rest of you playwrights? We'd love to hear from you about your process, your writing, being brave to write these stories and bring them out.
I'll go. So
Okay.
at first I was kind of nervous at the idea of writing about rape. Like I know it was mentioned in the first day of class. So at first I was like intimidated and I didn't know how it was gonna go or like if I was gonna really be able to write something on the topic. But then after the course, like after everything that I've learned and like all the information like I absorbed and that we were given on like theater and different people's experience, like I actually felt like able, I wasn't as nervous and I felt like I was capable of actually writing something. Yeah, so it's interesting seeing it come this far, you know, because at first it was just like a class assignment. So then seeing it come through this process was really interesting and kind of shocking still.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jadeline. Yvette, did you want to say anything?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that I do agree with Jadeline. Like I did feel personally, I felt very nervous at first. I was like, oh my God, like what if I do something that offends anybody? Like, you know, it's a really like not a strong topic, but I feel like not everybody's used to writing about it. And so it's like for other people to see, it's really overwhelming. But you know, seeing how far it's come and like how many people are watching and how important it is that people take this into account, like it actually like you feel proud of yourself that you're actually speaking out about a topic that is so important, that it's happening everywhere. And personally, like I know people that have gone through this issue, especially with what happens in my play. And so I felt like it was important for me to like kind of put that anger into my writing and kind of just speak out and put my feelings into it. So I am really thankful for the opportunity. It was really interesting, a really interesting time to work on this.
I also think that Elena, you can.
Elena, you're muted. Yeah, there you go.
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to like have a platform to even speak about these things, because I feel like we don't have that enough. Something that really stuck with me while seeing rape is how sexual violence and sexism is in the subtleness. It's not clear cut, like Bianca said, black and white. It's in the words we use, it's in our body language, it's in our mood and tone. It's like being called sweetheart during an interview, which kind of really stuck with me because it doesn't cause physical harm, but it still takes a toll on how we view ourselves and our position in the man's world, in the world we live in. I do have two questions. One is administrative, like what is the Seeing Rape class and like how can I join, or like what the course is like? And my other question is, how does intersectionality reflect or kind of retell stories being told in this like new 21st century where we want to start talking and we want to start exploring things that happen to not just specific type of women but all women? Thank you.
That's a beautiful question. I will definitely tell you how to take Seeing Rape. It's an ISP course. It's ISP 334, sex, gender, and justice in a global perspective or something like that. I'll put it in the chat. But does anyone else want to take the second question, the more interesting and important question about intersectionality?
I just wanted to add that I think that Dominique already talked about this as well, about the intersectionality of, maybe it was Dominique, I think, but about just the intersectionality of other minorities and people of color who deserve to be highlighted in their stories. As a gay woman, I also found it important to highlight different sexualities within these plays, because a lot of the time homosexual rape does not get reported and does not get taken seriously whatsoever. That's not even defined as rape in most states. So I think that a way of like stepping forward is recognizing and defining what really is rape. What do we constitute as rape? Because I know in most states, rape is penetration, and rape comes in so many different nuances, and you really learn about that in this course. And you learn just how varied the situations are, and the fact that we really need to broaden our horizons on like what we're really dealing with and how we view it and who's involved, and then attacking the problem. I think that is kind of like how intersectionality would work in what I think. I don't know.
Thank you, Frankie. And, I just want to say that in Seeing Rape, we don't ever define rape. That we don't think that it's our job to define rape. So it's interesting being at a college of criminal justice where maybe definitions of laws and crimes get put up on PowerPoints all the time, but we really resist that because we do think that people should be able to define it, and that these kind of archaic definitions don't serve us anymore. But I'd like to circle back to Professor Andrus and Professor McKinson on these questions of defining rape, and then also of intersectionality. So Professor Andrus?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the legal and definitions. I've worked with the Utah State court system to create jury instructions on rape cases, on all manner of sexual assault cases. And the definitions, you're right, are very penetration oriented, but also they're nuanced in a troubling way. If you have X with Y and B and A, then it equals this kind of sexual assault. And it's these equations that have to be mapped onto bodies that are exclusive in troubling ways and inclusive in other ways. So it becomes the people who are judged by these definitions become lists of body parts instead of people who have experiences, people who have nuanced lives, people who were hurt. And that part gets excluded with the minute it gets legally implicated. And then the other just brief comment I wanted to make is, for sure the law needs to change, but also policing needs to change. It's when police make arrests and write down what happened that stuff gets translated into it. And it's when a police officer, to use your example, Frankie, gets to a situation with two women in intimate partner violence or rape, and they start making judgments. They start making judgment calls before it even gets to the actual law. So the place where we need to start the change is with the police.
Thank you.
So I'll say, great question, Elena, who is a former student of mine as well. So hi to you. Great question about intersectionality, and such an important one as well. In my earlier comments, I was suggesting that, we have to think more capaciously about how it is that we understand gender violence, right? And even as we're hearing now, how it is that we, define rape itself. Of course, when we think about intersectionality, which in, so many ways is this buzzword now and gets thrown around so much, and, everybody, says that they're intersectional, and they see the world in an intersectional way. And we think about, how it is that gender overlaps with race and class, sexual identity. But, I think that when we think about Kimberly Crenshaw's idea of, intersectionality, and she calls it not so much a theory, but a framework, right? I think it's important for us, right, to even go beyond these static social categories of gender and class and race and ethnicity. So I'm thinking back to, Dominique's earlier comment too, about the fact that, very much conscious of the ways in which violence against women, right, has differently impacted, Black women, and what does it mean to direct a Black woman actress in a place such as Seeing Rape. Because I think beyond just thinking through these static social categories, we also have to think spatiotemporally, right? We have to think about the ways in which the body is an archive, right? And the way in which it's an embodied archive that carries these histories for certain bodies in particular, across space and time. And so there's for example, if we're thinking specifically about Black women, there's a subtleness of violence against Black women that transcends the very temporal moment that we inhabit right now, right? It's beyond just this specific moment in time and the violences against Black women's bodies, right? It's a violence that is historical. It's a violence that's carried in the flesh, right? And as we think about rape as a crime against the body and as a crime against the flesh, for Black women, there's a way in which there's a historical genealogy and narrative to these crimes. So for me, you know, when we're asked, when we talk about intersectionality, I think it's also an opportunity for us to, you know, challenge the, you know, the spatiotemporal bounds that we oftentimes limit ourselves to. And I think in thinking in that way, I think we can truly, you know, mobilize a kind of intersectional framework that can really allow us to expand how it is that we think about race, expand how it is that we think about gender violence. And, you know, the play really resonated for me in that way. And I'll also say too, you know, and I'm thinking about Dominique's earlier comment too, you know, referencing Saidiya Hartman about how it is that we, you know, in essence, can replicate the violence in the watching of these stories, right? It's this tender balance between, you know, the violence of watching, but also on the other hand, a kind of witnessing as well. And, you know, it really made me think about Norbesi Philip, who is a poet. And, you know, she has this brilliant book of poetry on the slave ship Zong that encountered trouble at sea, and in order to essentially collect insurance money, they threw African slaves who had been stolen from their homeland overboard. And she essentially goes into the archive to try and find these stories, find these histories, but of course, as we know, for Black peoples, telling our stories and confronting our stories in the archives means confronting silence, right? And so for me, it's this larger question, which really resonates for me with seeing rape as well. How do we tell these stories? And this is a question that Norbesi Phillips asked. How do we tell the stories that cannot be told but must be told, right? And even for, you know, the playwrights who we have with us here today, you know, as we confront these like very hard, difficult, you know, traumatic stories that when you hear about it, when you watch it in a play, it almost leaves you reeling with this sense of vertigo as well, you know. I guess it's this question that I have for the playwrights too. How do we tell, and for Dominique as the director too, how do we tell these stories that cannot be told but must be told, right? I think working with a story that's an account of somebody who has been raped or who has experienced, you know, gender-based violence is obviously a different kind of crime than slavery, but it's also a crime against the body, and it's a crime against the flesh as well too, right? And the crime, you know, as we saw from the different stories, it stays in the body as well. But narrating that story, telling that story, whether that's from by the person who was raped, whether that's by a playwright, whether that's by a director, it forces us to confront the politics of witnessing, the politics of, you know, silences as well, and how it is that we really do engage the body, you know, the body as an archive in and of itself. So I just thought I'd just, you know, share those, which has been, you know, thoughts coming to me based on the conversation that we've been having.
Thank you, Kim. Did you want to respond, Dominique?
Oh, and if I could just say a special shout out to Amara as well too, because she was just fantastic. And just, you're just a chameleon. It was just amazing to me how you were able to, you know, mold your body and between the different stories. I thought you were, you know, really brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's a really I love that you brought up Zong. I love that that collection of poems. And I think the other thing for me too is how do you tell the story of violence for people whose violences are not registered as violence? And how you really go about working. I think again, for me, like the sort of violences that I'm often interested in are the violences of anti-Blackness. And one of the problems that you get into, I think, when we start to think in terms of intersectionality, right, is like there's this idea of being able to cleanly sometimes map out where these violences intersect at the, like, thinking about it literally at the site of a car crash, right? I think oftentimes where I come from is I'm thinking more in line with the idea of assemblages that Joseph Pouar deposits, right? That all of these things, all of these identities are constantly meeting and clashing inside of people's bodies, and there it is even more difficult to place those entry points, right? And so I think in line with that question of how you confront those questions of silence in the archives, I think the only answer I have is Hartman's idea of critical fabulation, right? That there are all that, especially in the archives of American chattel slavery and I think slavery worldwide, which I think is a continued ongoing stunning event of sexual violence, even if it's oftentimes not registered as such, right? There are gaps that must be filled in, and sometimes those gaps need to be filled in creatively. Those gaps need to be filled in from a space of imagination where you are trying to imagine an otherwise for the slave, right? And I think at least a large thrust of my directing, I think in the recent year has become really obsessed with this idea that Frank Wilderson talks about in Red, White, and Black, the cinema of U.S. antagonisms and policing, where he talks about the how we chart the narrative arc of the slave, right? How does the slave fit into the structure of film? How does the slave fit into the structure of cinema? The problem is it doesn't, right? Because what does a film or a play generally end with? It ends with catharsis. That is not how the slave's life ends, right? The catharsis of emancipation is oftentimes a ruse. And so for me, it really is leaning into that silence and being willing to, with actors like Amara, say, we have to find ways to fill in this gap. If history won't offer us anything, how can I imagine, even if, like Hartman talks about, inside of the loophole of retreat, how can I imagine my ancestor happy? How can I imagine the bodies of these enslaved people finding some sort of liberation, even if I in 2021 am still dealing with the conditions that they lived in and toiled through, right? I think that silence, as disheartening as it is and as ongoingly unfortunate as it is, deposits a new space in some ways for possibility and to think through and to think otherwise and to imagine differently, not only the archive, but also the history that we inhabit.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. I was wondering, Professor Andrus, if you wanted to talk a little bit about this notion that Kim and Dominique are talking about from your perspective as a survivor, because Kim uses this language. She says a tender balance, and I felt like I heard you talking about a tender balance when you were talking.
Yeah, this conversation is making me think about storytelling, and I mean, and indeed, that's what I talked about in my original comments. Because in my research, what I do is I talk to, by and large, women about what happened to them in intimate partner and sexualized, gendered violence, and have conversations around bodies and around violence and around events, and in important stuff comes out, and it's not always balanced, but sometimes it is. Every single time they say, thank you for asking me these questions, please tell my story, because these stories don't get out. And that's what I really appreciate from these playwrights, is that these stories need to get out. We need to tell the stories. We need to talk about these things. They need to not stay secreted, locked inside ourselves. And so I really value this moment of telling. For me as a survivor, the balance is rarely tender. It's mostly erratic, right? So I'll go through my life not really thinking about the fact that I have one eye because my ex-husband shot me in the head. But then I'll see myself in the mirror and think, oh, I have one eye. Or I spent a lot of time planning the light in this room that I'm sitting in because it shows through my black lens and you can see my eye. And then I finally had to come to terms with the fact that my scar was going to be visible to a lot of people that I don't know and that I couldn't sort of explain my whole story to. So it's always a balance, but it's not always tender. That would be my response.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of that. Very sorry that all of that happened to you. But we're so glad that you're here and with us tonight. Would the playwrights like to say anything about, this notion of revealing violence, which can also enact or make us feel like we've had something happen to us that is violent, and also telling that story, right? Trying to find that type of tender balance. So Stephanie.
I wanted to first say to you, was just hearing that was, it's one thing to write about it or read about it, but to actually hear it, it's tough to hear. I'm sorry about that. And I wanted to agree with you about what you said, that it's like important that we tell these stories, that these stories are not being told. And mine was about military rape. And what I was realizing was we talk a lot about women being raped, but it's not often that we talked about that. These are happening to men as well. And I was watching like an old news thing, and it was talking about like men coming forward and stuff like that. And often that time they stay silent and don't talk about it and stuff like that. I was like, this is happening, but no one's talking about it. It's nowhere to be found. There's nothing representing that. And I was just like, okay, so we got to talk about it. Like, we got to show, you got to represent it. So like, from everything that I've seen and watched, I just recreated this story and was just like, it has to focus on men as well. So that's why I did that.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, for bringing that to light. I think the statistic is something like, men's chances of being raped increase dramatically when they join the military. The military is a very dangerous place for men with respect to rape. So thank you. Frankie.
So I wanted to address both Miss Underis's story. I had a visceral reaction to your story. And I know sorry doesn't do enough. And I commend you for being so strong. I, with Stephanie's play, was really appreciative of the fact that you actually touched on homosexual rape, because that was something that I didn't know how to put into words. I am a sexual assault survivor of both homosexual rape and heterosexual sexual assault. And the nuances between each are, they're similar yet different. And it's hard when you're experiencing it yourself to find those words, but through a community like this where such smart and educated individuals are using their knowledge to spread this information and spread that this is so common and this happens to so many people. This is real. This is not just a story that we all wrote about for a class. These are real things. And I just really appreciate the opportunity for not only me, but everyone else to be able to do this. And I thank everyone else who did it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. So it is all a lot to take in, and we can sit the silence for a couple of minutes. If any of the other students would like to say anything, I recognize a lot of names here from my class, my classes. I think there are 3. So we would love to hear from you, what you thought about the plays, what people are saying in the talkback.
Can I go?
Of course, yes. I was going to talk about your paper, but you could.
Okay. So I think each play shows its own individual aspect of what happens throughout the world, different countries, different religions. And it was a lot to take in because it's oftentimes you see certain things that happens on TV, but you never really acknowledge it to happen in real life. Like it's different to watch a movie and this is occurring in versus knowing that, you walk out the door today, tomorrow, it could be you, or that you have a next door neighbor where these things are happening to. And I feel like, this everything that's going on in this panel, like this is so relevant to the world, and that we need to make this, something more noticeable, something bigger, seeing that, a lot of people just like mental health issues, it goes unseen. It goes like people try to ignore the reality of these things. And I find that this sheds a light on the fact that it targets everybody, and it doesn't matter what race or culture or anything that you are, because people have these certain tendencies. It is real and it does often happen, and it doesn't matter the age either, and whether it's your family, your friends, or a stranger. So the reality of it all, it's just too real. And this just brings more awareness. It brings awareness to people, whether in John Jay or not. We're already in a school that tries to battle for justice, and I feel like just this it just touched so broadly here. So yeah.
Thank you, Diamond. Thank you. So we have a couple more minutes. Like I said, if people want to try to formulate a response. Elena?
I just wanted to add something to what Francesca said. I feel like there's something safe and special about community. It kind of reminds us that we're not alone and we go through the experience together. But it just gets me so frustrated that there are institutions in place that want to separate us, that like pin women against each other and makes us envious. And I feel like if we could just rid ourselves of all that toxic and like just like hate and like looking at the media and like body shaming ourselves and body shaming our fellow females, like once we get over that hurdle, I feel like we can be unstoppable as a gender and as a community.
So I have a thought or a question. This is for anybody here. Do you find any room for restorative justice with rape and sexual assault? Because I find as a culture, we're talking a lot about restorative justice, or trying to get there in some way. We're by no means anywhere near there. But how would sexual assault play into that, when I feel like it's something that we're almost just beginning to recognize as a crime? Lots of hands.
I just wanted to make a comment off the bat that I believe that it starts with the education at a young age of these young men about consent and about what a woman's body means and what their body means, and how like sex education is so limited throughout this country. And I understand that we're talking about reform when they've already done this crime. What about talking about the reform before they even get to that point? I think that by the time that it's done in this society and the way that we're going, it's hard to talk about fixing that mentality. I mean, when you start thinking about fixing it, I think it stems from starting at like that young age of where it can be formulated of like, this is okay and I'm powerful and I can do this. And that needs to be broken. This this, so I think that might be the start of it. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
Thanks, Frankie.
To add on to that, some other countries have already implemented that if someone is caught, let's say in regards to like pedophilia, that they recommend castration. So I think that's also interesting too, because unlike, you know, the US, it's like, you know, we want some type of restorative justice, whether it's the victim and the perpetrator consoling through supervised meetings or through letters, while these other countries are like, okay, if this is what happened, then this person gets castrated. And I'm not sure how it works for a female perpetrator, but I just like to include that in there.
Thank you, Diamond. Avi?
I just want to say, first and foremost, if you had asked me that question, like at various points throughout my healing process, you would have gotten wildly different answers. Because I think it just has to do with like, if you want to talk about like restorative justice on the individual level, personally, and I mean this from a place of someone who has gone to therapy forever to try and heal, I don't think that can happen for me. I don't think there's anything that could be done where I would be like, wow, it's fixed, right? And that's part of why I appreciate seeing rape so much, because I have such beef with the way healing from rape is portrayed in media, because it's ridiculous. Like I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left were like, oh, if you kill your rapist, it's like double negative and it cancels each other out and you're healed, which is like the stupidest thing ever. When it comes to restorative justice on a global level, Diamond was saying something about castration. There is chemical castration offered for pedophiles if they want early release in some places. That's also an issue I have with the way we talk about rape. There is a difference between people who have the mental illness of pedophilia and people who use power to abuse little children. And I think until we recognize that, we're still flying blind, because there are a lot of people who need help and there's a lot of people who need to be kept away from other people. And those are two different groups of people. I think restorative justice on the global level, now that I'm in a place where I'm no longer like, you know, very fucking angry, looks like is similar to what Francesca was saying. Like education is so important for me, because I'm now in a place where I'm like, how can I make sure that this doesn't happen to other people? Knowing that what it's like, that's my main focus, is how can I make sure this doesn't happen to other people? And also, how can we switch the narrative? Because right now we look at rape victims as, you know, if we're using like the gender normative of the more commonly raped groups, right? We look at victims as mothers, sisters, daughters. We don't look at rapists as fathers, sons, and brothers, right? That's a massive issue. We don't look at rapists. And that there was that one, what was it? Did He Do It? That play, it did so much for me, because talking about someone you know.
Yeah, that was Van Hyro Payano's play. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Talking about like someone you know and being like, oh, like, did they do it? And the debate of that, and someone said this earlier, like the verbiage used was so casual. And I was like, this is a conversation I could be having with one of my friends. And it's a conversation lots of people have with their friends, and they don't come to the conclusion of, oh, he did it, we don't work with him anymore, right? They stay friends, they stay brothers, they stay uncles, they stay whatever. And that's a big part of the problem. And when it comes to education, we have to stop teaching girls, hey, make sure the other girl gets raped, because that's what we teach them when we say protect yourself. We have to start teaching the rapists, don't rape. And it's hard because, again, we don't discriminate whether or not it comes from like past trauma, a mental illness and compulsion, or someone like, I don't know, Jeffrey Epstein, who has so much power and has to constantly up the ante on what sex looks like for him, because he's able to do anything. And so it's an expression of power, right? And until we can actually go into those scary places, and I think the reason we haven't gone into them is no one cares about us. I know that sounds harsh, but no one cared about the victims until recently, right? We were so afraid. There was such a stigma of being damaged goods. No one was willing to talk about it. And now that we're finally talking about it, and we're like, this isn't a damaged good thing. I'm not defective because of something someone else did, right? Now that we're finally talking about it, we have to go to the scary place. We have to talk about it. We have to be able to say, okay, why did this person rape? How do we say, hey, don't rape? How do we identify the triggers? How do we identify when a child is being abused to intervene? How do we stop this cycle? And that's what restorative looks like to me, is breaking the cycle. Not just saying, oh, we're gonna, put in a program to help people, talk about it. Is how do we pinpoint the issues that are keeping this going? Because that's still the mystery to me. And it's a scary thing to think about, because then you have to go there and you have to talk to the rapists, and you have to talk to, and I don't want to talk to a rapist, but we have to figure it out. And I think that facing our worst fears in that way might help us.
Thank you, Avi. Dominique, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I struggle a lot, like sort of personally with restorative justice, because I am always trying to figure out the question of like, what is justice to the slave, right? And the answer is obviously like abolition. That's the answer to the question, and you deal with it or you don't. But I think in the context of like this conversation around restorative justice, one of the things that I so often see, I think, in conversations about restorative justice is what restorative justice looks like to the abuser and not the abused, right? I don't think that oftentimes in conversations around restorative justice, we really think about what it means to think through justice from the point of the abusee as opposed to the abuser, right? If we don't actually center the healing of the person who did the harm, but the healing of the person who has been harmed, I think is the first place we must begin when we think about restoring justice, right? Because we are failing people. I mean, y'all are living through the same pandemic I'm living through, right? Like, people are being failed daily, by the minute, by the second, right? And so how do we really come to terms with the violences that are being perpetrated? And I think to what Avi just said, there is something to, and I mentioned this during one of the rehearsals, the way we even think about rapists, right? There is this idea that a rapist is someone who sort of lurks in the bushes, lurks in the shadows of the night, when like you're much more likely just to know the person who might rape. You already, like, in the sort of the way that we know about it, you are always already in knowledge of the person who is going to assault you. And that is terrifying. That is horrifying. So what then is necessary to not only prevent that violence from happening to you, but the necessity of abolishing the society that allows that violence to happen, right? I think for me, restorative justice looks like abolition. And until we get there, I'm not sure even what healing looks like, right? Because the violences are continuing. And again, I don't know how many times I can talk about slavery on this call, but right, the violences of slavery, what does it mean to arrive in a world where there is already violence waiting for you, where the body that is carrying you, the womb that is going to birth you, is filled with violences that you know nothing of, right? Yeah, abolition now, that's it.
I wanted to hop off of both what Dominique and Avi were saying. Both of what you were saying is something that I actually find really interesting, and what I talked about in my bio, actually. I plan on hopefully working with both sexual assault survivors and rapists to hopefully gather from their experiences and understand their mentalities. I plan on working not only with psychologists, but with neurological people who understand like the actual brain chemistry as to what is going on, psychosocial theorists and workers who understand the societal mechanisms of what is playing into this as well. I mean, it's a very heavy and hard thing, but I think that what you're talking about is so important. And really, it is the key to changing this narrative. I mean, you got to look at the source. A lot of people are afraid, and rightfully so, to talk to the rapists. And especially if you're a survivor, you don't want to put yourself back in that position. But you have to think about it when you're at a school like John Jay. You got to think about it from that other perspective of like, no, there's a reason why they did this. And the reason why they did this is important. It needs to be just talked through and actually paid attention to rather than pushed to the side. and covered up. I really appreciate both Avi and Dominique for bringing that up, because that's something I have a really big passion for. So I hope to hopefully further this research in the future. And yeah.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have a final remark? It's 8:15, so that's probably time for us to sign off. But if there are no, I want to make sure
Oh
that.
yeah, I would like, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, no, I would like to share a thought as well, because I had to deal with that when I was younger, unfortunately when I was 12. And it is hard to come out because like sometimes women that don't understand this topic as well can be very judgmental. I remember, for example, a couple of years ago, I was like on an online forum, and when I spoke about dealing with that in junior high, it was a male student that I trusted in my class. And, you know, when he was like, oh, like we're going to go to another student's house to do homework together, that it ended up being something else. But when I went into detail about that, I remember how harsh another woman was online and was like, well, that was nothing compared to what I went through, because it was my father that did it. So yours is like nothing. And I thought that was hurtful, because no matter what anybody goes through, the outcome is not good at all to go through sexual violence. You know, to me, it's a big thing. And I thought that was very hurtful, that people could be like, well, my experience was worse than yours. But you know, I would never, in my point of view, I would never do that to anybody. I would always be respectful and understand like anything is not okay, because you know, like nobody gave that consent. If somebody's like forceful on you, they touch you, they penetrate you, etc. But yeah, it was definitely crazy to hear. And then another thing that I find interesting, that I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but especially at that age, like when I had to hit puberty, and it was like very difficult to deal with, because it's like a part of you still like a kid at 12, but then it's like at the same time you want to grow up and be an adult. And I felt like I was like shifted into this position where I wanted to grow up quick, and then I slowed down after that. But when I expressed this a few years ago as well on the online forum, and even telling this to some relatives and stuff, people are like, oh, well, you know, after you go through assault, if you start acting kind of hypersexualized, that makes you a whore and whatever. But they don't realize if you're kind of thrown into that, you don't really know how to deal with that mentally. Like maybe you weren't ready, you know, to engage in anything sexual. And like, it's interesting when you think about it, because some people after going through that, either they don't want to deal with anything, and then there's others that feel like they want to do it, and maybe something inside of them is like, I don't feel right, but then they feel like they want to kind of just continue and you know, just hop into one thing to another and fool around. And like, I kind of had a point where I was a little out of control when I was a teenager, and then I'm glad I kind of got out of that phase when I was like 15. And you know, I realized that wasn't me. I was doing things I didn't want to, but it was because I was like thrown into that how do I say, like basically like that pit of fire. And then I slowed down, like, whoa, like this is not what I want. And you know, so I'm glad that I was able to kind of get out of that phase. But like, yeah, it's a lot to take in and interesting to learn about at the same time, because people will think like maybe, oh, you dress sexual, you ask for it. And that, you know, that isn't the case at all. You could just wear like baggy clothing, and if you're a target, you're still a target. But yeah, it is interesting how people deal with it mentally. Like, does it change something in you where you feel like after that happened, like you're not worth anything? Like, oh, I might as well just continue what I went through and continue in these sexual activities, or, you know, maybe somebody's the complete opposite. I'm not going to feel comfortable until I find a partner who understands me. But, you know, it is interesting to think of those point of views, because growing up, like expressing those thoughts, people around me like couldn't really like, oh, but if you went through this, if I were you, I would feel like I would never want to be in a relationship. And I'm like, no, I've always wanted a relationship, but you just have to find, somebody who's respectful.
Right.
So I think that, that's the important thing to differentiate, like what you want and what you don't want.
Yeah, well, thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think you bring up so many important points. The whole, if that didn't happen to them, because if that were me, right, this is this other world syndrome that, where people think that they live in a different world than the world that people who are victimized lived in. And they don't. They live in that same world. And it could be them at any moment. They just haven't, met a rapist, right? So that it's not when anybody does, it's just, were you lucky or not that who did you meet? So I think you're absolutely right to ask all of these questions that you're asking. And the other thing that's so important is that people do respond differently. There is no cookie cutter, way to respond, which is one of the things we like to talk about in Seeing Rape, and being able to see rape in all of the different ways that it comes. And people don't respond in the same ways. As Avi pointed out, or maybe Frankie, like their own, our own trajectories after sexualized violence, we are different in the way that we react even throughout time, right? And I know Professor McKinson had brought up temporality and the body and time. The body and time is different, as well as very much accruing over time, right? So all of these things are at play. Frankie, you had your hand up?
Amy asked if anyone had gone through something similar, and I just wanted to tell her that she's not alone. I mean, I went through my homosexual rape experience took place when I was 4. So I have talked a lot in therapy, but I've grown up a rape victim, and I didn't realize that I was over sexual and started dating when I was like 11 and having relationships like that so early. That's not abnormal. You're not alone. That happens a lot. And I'm sorry that you were shamed. Within this community, a lot of us feel shame of ourselves. And we all know the old thing is like, if you don't feel good about yourself, you're going to want to make other people feel bad so you can feel better about yourself. I'm sorry that you went through that. Trauma shouldn't be compared. All trauma is valid. And I appreciate you sharing your story, but I wanted you to know that you're not alone and that your feelings were valid.
Well, I want to thank you all. This was so productive and so meaningful to me, and I feel like I learned so much listening to all of you. So thank you. I've been doing this now for 25 years, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of a very, very complex and difficult, very intersectional, just beginning to understand the Black experience through reading, talking, hearing. So thank you for bringing all of this to us, Dominique and Professor McKinson, when bringing your scholarship and your practice and your method to us. All very important. And Amara, thank you. You are brilliant, and I loved watching you in every piece. I want to thank the playwrights. You guys are everything. And the beauty, one of the beauties of the class that we've barely talked about is the beauty of writing. And you guys have this opportunity to write the world the way you want to see it. So keep it up, keep it up. And then to all of the students who are on tonight, thank you all. I truly love you. And Professor Cassidy, did you want to take the last word?
I just want to thank everybody for being here, creative people, students, professors, scholars. Thank you all. It was really kind of amazing.
And then just one special shout out to all of the people who talked about their own stories tonight. The students, the playwrights, Professor Andrus. Yeah, we are going to change the world in our ways. So thank you.
Before the video ends, I just wanted to say I appreciated the first play where they, I think Van Hyro, just the first line where the girl says, "I don't think he fucked that girl." I was like, oh crap, they're confusing, sex for rape. But then later on, she says, no, he raped her. So I just appreciated the difference between consensual sex and then the difference between rape. Just the language and the wording, I appreciated that.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you so much.
Someone
All right, guys, well, this was,
I just wanted to say someone asked where they could get the recordings. So you can get the recordings of the plays on seeingrape.com, and there will be a recording of this on seeingrape.com as well.
thank you all. Thank you for collaborating. Thank you. All right, have a good evening. Bye-bye.